June 29th, 1945. Kasumigaseki, Tokyo. The summer air hangs heavy with soot and humidity, the kind that clings to a uniform collar and turns every breath into warm metal. Outside the Naval General Staff building, the city is a patchwork of scars. Whole blocks lie flattened, their timbers turn to ash. A siren begins somewhere across the river. Rises, then dies off again, as if even the alarms have grown tired. Inside, the corridors smell of damp paper, ink, and charcoal. Electric light is rationed. Fans barely turn. Men in white summer uniforms move without conversation, stepping around sand buckets and blackout curtains, their shoes clicking softly on worn floors. Every face carries the same tension. The Navy has reached the end of what it can do, and everyone here knows it. Admiral Toyoda Soemu, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, stands in a dim office with the blinds pulled tight. He is not a theatrical man. His voice is low, measured, but the strain shows in the way his fingers press against the edge of the desk. A map of the home islands lies open, pins clustered along Kyushu and Honshu like tiny wounds. Red lines mark air corridors that no longer belong to Japan. A staff officer lays out the latest reports. The words are polite, formal, wrapped in the language of duty, but the meaning is blunt. Fuel reserves are nearly gone. Not low, not strained, nearly gone. What remains is fragmented, hidden in small caches, and already promised to the Army, to the Air Force, to the desperate needs of cities trying to keep a single generator running. Operational ships. The list is thinner every week. Air cover, almost non-existent. Training, a shadow of what it once was. Toyoda nods once, slowly. He does not ask for miracles. He does not ask for victory. Not anymore. He asks only where the pressure will fall next, and how long Japan can keep absorbing it. Down the hall, Navy Minister Admiral Yonai Mitsumasa sits with his jacket folded neatly beside him, as if order can still be enforced by habit. Yonai has been watching the same tide for months, longer than most. He was a fleet officer in an age when battleships were symbols of national pride. Now, symbols burn as easily as warehouses. He listens to an aide describe the air raids over Kure, the way carrier planes and land-based bombers circle and return. Circle and return. Hour after hour. Kure was once a sanctuary, a cradle of steel and repair docks. Now it is a target range. A ship that cannot sail is a ship that will be found. Yonai's eyes remain on the tabletop. When he speaks, it is not a speech, not a command, just a statement meant for the room. The Navy is finished. He does not mean courage is gone. He means the math is gone. The Navy was a machine, and the parts that made it move. Oil, aircraft, trained pilots, radar, escorts. They have been stripped away one by one. What is left can still die with honor, but it cannot change the outcome. A younger officer, still clinging to the idea that sacrifice can substitute for capability, mentions decisive battle, mentions the spirit of Tsushima, mentions one last blow, one last storm of torpedoes that will shock America into negotiating. Yonai turns his head slightly, and his gaze cuts through the room without anger. There is sadness there, and something like exhaustion. Negotiation requires leverage. A navy without fuel has none. Somewhere else in Tokyo, in a quieter office, Vice Admiral Fukudome Shigeru reviews dispatches with a pencil that has been sharpened down to a stub. His posture is rigid, his hair immaculate, but his eyes keep returning to the same numbers. How many sorties can still be flown? How many trained men remain? How many ships can still move without being instantly detected? Every calculation ends the same way. The Americans can press forever. Japan cannot. And there is another truth, whispered among men who have spent their lives on the sea. The Empire's last great surface action is already behind them. Leyte Gulf proved that courage does not sink an enemy with endless air power, and the Yamato, sent out in April with barely enough fuel for a one-way trip, proved something even crueler. The most powerful battleship ever built could be erased by aircraft before it ever reached its target. That lesson hangs over every desk in this building like smoke that will not clear. Toyota walks to the window, lifts the blackout curtain a finger's width, and looks out at a gray strip of sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon, American carriers steam with full bunkers and full decks. Somewhere beyond that, factories produce planes faster than Japan can bury the men it loses. Behind him, an aide asks, carefully, what guidance should be sent to the fleet remnants and the districts still begging for protection? Toyota keeps his eyes on the sky and answers in the tone of a man describing a storm he cannot divert. Endure, prepare, preserve what can be preserved. And in the silence that follows, what he does not say is louder than any siren. There will be no recovery. There will be no reversal. The war is already lost, even if the surrender has not yet been spoken. July 10th, 1945. Kure Naval District, Hiroshima Prefecture. The morning heat presses down on the inland sea like a lid. From the hills above the docks, the water looks calm, almost beautiful, but the harbor below is a graveyard in slow motion. Hulks sit at awkward angles. Scorched superstructures rise like broken ribs. Netting and camouflage drape across decks that no longer matter, because camouflage cannot hide a ship that cannot move. An officer stands on a concrete pier, binoculars up, scanning the sky out of habit. The real enemy is not the one you see. It is the one that already owns the air and chooses when to appear. A launch cuts through the oily water, heading toward a moored carrier that once would have been the pride of the fleet. Now it is a target waiting for a time slot in an American flight schedule. On the deck, sailors sweat in silence, painting over scorch marks, tightening lines, pretending maintenance is still a path back to readiness. It is not. In a shaded room ashore, a senior staff meeting has gathered around a table covered with charts and ration logs. The paper smells faintly of mildew. Someone has drawn a neat box around a single number, then underlined it twice. Fuel allotment. The number is so small it feels like a joke, except no one laughs. A rear admiral, face thin from months of sleepless nights, taps the page with a fingernail. He speaks quietly, because he has learned that saying the truth too loudly invites accusations of defeatism. Even if we wanted to sortie, we cannot, not for training, not for battle. We can steam to the mouth of the harbor, and then what? Drift while American aircraft circle. Another officer brings up the last hope that still circulates in some circles. The decisive battle near the home islands. The idea that the enemy will come close, and Japan will strike with everything in one final blow. A grayer man, older, with salt in his hair and a permanent tightness around his eyes, answers without raising his voice. Everything is no longer a fleet. Everything is a handful of shells and a few tanks of fuel hidden in drums. Everything is a promise we cannot keep. In the corner, a naval aviator lieutenant commander listens with his cap in his lap. His hands are stained with oil and sweat. He has watched air groups evaporate, not in glorious duels, but in training accidents and failed takeoffs, in desperate interceptions against formations that never end. When he speaks, it is with the bluntness of someone who has buried friends without time for ceremony. We are outnumbered in the air beyond counting. Our pilots are brave, but they are not ours and gasoline. The enemy can replace losses. We cannot. Outside, the distant thud of anti-aircraft guns begins, then fades, then begins again. The sound rolling across the hills like summer thunder. Someone glances toward the window, instinctively tightening his jaw. But no one stands. There is nothing to be done. A gun crew can fire, but it cannot change the sky. Later. As the meeting breaks into smaller knots of conversation, two admirals step into a corridor where the air is barely cooler. They keep their voices low, but their words carry the weight of confession. "The Navy cannot defend the sea lanes," one says, eyes fixed on the floorboards. "And without sea lanes, the Empire starves," the other answers, not with argument, but with a tired exhale. It is already starving. They are not speaking in metaphors. American submarines prowl the approaches. Mines have begun to appear where there should be safe water. Coastal traffic that once moved coal and rice now vanishes overnight. Crews talk about mines like ghosts, invisible and unavoidable, waiting beneath the surface for a propeller to pass. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff receives the same reports, stacked in neat folders like funeral notices. Another convoy gone, another coastal freighter ripped open, another escort sunk while trying to rescue survivors. In a private office, an admiral runs his thumb along the edge of a paper map and speaks to his chief of staff, not as a commander issuing orders, but as a man finally naming what has been obvious. "We cannot resist prolonged pressure. We have no capacity to recover, not in months, not in years." The chief of staff hesitates, then asks the question that has been suffocating the Navy since Okinawa fell and the raids became routine. "Then what do we tell them? The cabinet? The emperor?" The admiral does not answer at first. He looks at the map, at the narrow straits and crowded ports, at a homeland that has become an island fortress without the fuel to run its own guns. When he finally speaks, the words come out carefully, as if he is placing them on the table like fragile glass. "We tell them the truth, even if it cannot be spoken in a public. The Navy has lost the war. All that remains is how many more will die before the nation accepts it." Far away, on another airfield, a young pilot bows before climbing into a plane loaded for a one-way mission. The officers watching him do not call it surrender, and they do not call it victory. They call it duty. But in the eyes of the older men, the ones who remember fleets at anchor and carrier decks alive with trained air groups, there is a private recognition that duty has been twisted into something else, a substitute for capability, a mask for collapse. And across every desk, in every folder of reports, one fact repeats like a heartbeat that cannot be ignored. The enemy is not slowing down. Japan is running out. July 22nd, 1945. The Imperial Palace grounds. Tokyo. The air inside the palace complex is strangely still, insulated from the city's burned neighborhoods by walls and trees that have not yet been torn apart by bombs. Even here, however, the war presses in. You can smell the smoke on the breeze. You can hear the distant rumble of raids like a storm that never moves on. A car rolls slowly along the gravel drive. Tires crunch softly. Inside sits Navy Minister Admiral Yonai Mitsumasa, face set, hands folded, uniform immaculate in the way an old sailor keeps his dignity when the deck is already tilting. He is coming to a meeting that will not be recorded honestly in any public communique. The Empire is approaching a point where words themselves become dangerous. Another vehicle arrives behind him. Admiral Toyoda Soemu steps out, shoulders squared, expression controlled. His rank and position demand confidence, but his eyes have the flat look of a man who has stared too long at loss tables and fuel ledgers. In a nearby building, Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro and other senior figures gather. Some arrive with rigid expressions, others with the guarded calm of men who have learned to hide their fear behind etiquette. The Army's representatives appear in stiff formation, their faces hard, their posture daring anyone to say the forbidden thing. Peace, surrender, defeat. The meeting begins with formalities and opens into a familiar argument, the same one that has repeated since Saipan, since the Philippines, since Okinawa. The Army speaks of resolve, of national essence, of enduring one more decisive struggle on the beaches of Kyushu and the plains beyond. There is talk of inflicting such casualties that America will negotiate. The Navy men exchange brief glances. They have heard this before. They know the sea does not care about spirit, and the sky does not care about slogans. When Toyota speaks, he does it in the language of logistics and capability. He does not say the nation lacks courage. He says it lacks fuel. He says the fleet is immobilized. He says the air arm is exhausted. He says the enemy's control of the sea is now a fact. He does not need to raise his voice. The room is quiet because everyone understands what he is describing. A senior army officer responds sharply, suggesting the Navy is simply unwilling to sacrifice its remaining ships. He implies cowardice without using the word, the old inter-service poison flaring, even as the Empire burns. Yonai turns his head slowly. His expression does not change, but his gaze is direct, almost cold. The question is not sacrifice, he says. The question is whether sacrifice achieves anything. That sentence lands like a weight. It is not dramatic. It is not shouted. But it is a door opening, a crack of light into a room built to keep reality out. The army man tries to push back, insisting that the nation must fight on regardless, that the people will endure, that the homeland battle will redeem everything lost overseas. Yonai does not argue ideology. He speaks like a sailor reading the weather. The people are already enduring fire every night. They are enduring hunger. They are enduring the collapse of transport and industry. We cannot defend the shipping. We cannot defend the skies. We are not choosing whether to endure. We are choosing whether to be destroyed. No one writes those words down, and yet they hang there, undeniable. After the formal meeting breaks, Yonai is guided through quieter corridors for a smaller discussion. Here, the voices soften, and the truth becomes less guarded. A court official mentions the possibility of Soviet mediation, the idea that Moscow might help broker an end. A few men cling to it as if it is a rope thrown to a drowning sailor. Toyota listens, then answers carefully. If we rely on mediation, we must understand time is against us. The enemy's pressure increases every day. Our capacity decreases every day. A pause. Then the unspoken thought is allowed to form in the air. We do not have days to waste. In another room, a vice admiral, older and visibly strained, leans close to a colleague and murmurs something he would never say in a full conference. It is already lost. If they insist on a decisive battle, it will be decisive only in the number of dead. The colleague does not contradict him. He only nods. Outside, beyond the palace walls, Tokyo's streets are still filled with people trying to live in the ruins. Mothers queue for rice. Workers clear debris. Children carry water buckets. The Navy's remaining aircraft, few and poorly fueled, sit dispersed under trees and netting, like animals hiding from hunters. That afternoon, Yonai returns to his office and closes the door. No aides, no clerks. Only a few trusted papers on his desk and the sound of distant aircraft engines. Faint, high, and constant. He sits, removes his gloves, and stares at a photograph pinned inside a folder. An older image. Ships at anchor, decks bright with sunlight. Men standing easy, confident. The kind of Navy Japan believed would decide the future. He sets the photograph down and speaks quietly. To no one, but perhaps to the memory of what the Navy once was. We have reached the end. He does not mean the end of honor. He means the end of options. The war is not lost because morale fails. It is lost because the tools of war have been taken away. A navy without fuel is a monument. An air arm without pilots is a cemetery. A strategy without shipping is a fantasy. And now the most dangerous part begins. Not the fighting, the speaking. Because to say the war is lost is to challenge the foundation of everything the empire has demanded from its people. Yet inside these offices, behind closed doors, Japanese admirals are already shaping sentences they never imagined they would need. How to tell the emperor. How to tell the cabinet. How to tell a nation trained to equate surrender with shame that surrender may be the only act left that can still save lives. August 3rd, 1945. Inland Sea, near the approaches to Kure. Dawn comes in pale layers over the water, the horizon turning from charcoal to bruised purple to a washed-out gold that feels almost cruel in its calmness. A small patrol craft moves slowly between markers, its engine notes subdued, conserving what little fuel it has. The crew stands at their posts with rifles slung and eyes scanning the surface, as if the ocean itself might betray them. This is what the Imperial Japanese Navy has become. Not squadrons steaming in formation, not carrier decks launching waves of aircraft, but small vessels picking their way through their own coastal waters, afraid of mines, afraid of submarines, afraid of aircraft that could appear at any moment and end everything in minutes. A young petty officer grips the rail and watches the shoreline slide past. He has never seen the combined fleet at full strength. His war has been retreat and air raids and the slow stripping away of everything that once made the Navy feel unstoppable. He listens to the older men talk in short phrases, and he can hear what they do not say. There is no next operation. There is only survival until the next siren. At Kure, in a reinforced room beneath sandbagged windows, an admiral sits with a cigarette he does not light. The match would smell too strongly, like admitting he wants comfort. He is reviewing a report on the remnants of naval aviation, the numbers written in tidy columns that make them look less like a tragedy. Operational aircraft. Few trained pilots. Fewer spare parts, almost none. Fuel, a ration measured like medicine. A staff officer, voice hoarse from days of briefing and being briefed, explains that even if every remaining plane were launched in one massed strike, it would be a single wave. A single wave against an enemy who can generate wave after wave, day after day. The Admiral nods. He already knows. The report is not information, it is confirmation. He asks for the latest on shipping. The answer is worse. Coastal cargo is being strangled. Barges and small freighters are sunk near the shore. Escorts are insufficient. Mines appear in channels that were safe yesterday. The sea itself has become contested in a way Japanese sailors never expected so close to home. The staff officer hesitates, then adds something else. Morale, not the public morale, the kind that newspapers still claim is unbreakable, but the internal morale of officers who can read a chart. Men are beginning to speak differently, not loudly, not in groups, but in private corners at the end of long nights. The word defeat is being replaced by phrases like unavoidable conclusion. The Admiral finally lights his cigarette. The smoke curls upward and clings to the ceiling, slow and gray. Do they still talk of victory? He asks. The staff officer chooses his words carefully. They speak of one last blow. They speak of forcing negotiation. The Admiral exhales. Negotiation requires something to bargain with. We have only bodies left to spend. Outside, a distant drone grows louder. Heads lift. The instinct is automatic. Everyone has learned the sound of engines at altitude, the way it changes when aircraft are approaching and when they are merely passing. The drone becomes a layered roar. American planes. No one says it out loud, but you can feel the room tighten. A clerk instinctively covers a stack of papers as if paper can be protected from bombs. A lieutenant's hand goes to his sidearm, an absurd reflex. Then the roar fades slightly. Shifting direction. Perhaps they are bound for another target. Perhaps this time Kure is spared. No one relaxes. Not truly. Because being spared today means being hit tomorrow. That afternoon, a small gathering forms in a shaded courtyard. Senior officers speaking in low voices. One of them, a vice admiral with a narrow face and a scar near his jawline, has just returned from Tokyo. He carries news, but not the kind that can be delivered in a formal memo. He looks at the others and says, quietly, as if he is breaking a taboo, The leadership knows. Some of them know. They are searching for a way out. A captain stiffens. A way out, he repeats, as if testing the phrase. The vice admiral nods once, before the homeland is turned into ashes. Another officer, younger, still charged with the idea that sacrifice is holy, snaps back that there is always a way out through battle, through dying properly. The older men do not insult him. They do not call him foolish. They simply look at him with something like pity. An admiral steps forward, hands clasped behind his back. "I have sent men to die for years," he says. "I will not pretend death is strategy. We have no fleet. We have no air cover. We have no fuel. If we continue, we do not protect the nation. We destroy what remains of it." The young officer's mouth opens, then closes. He is not convinced, but he has no answer for fuel and ships and aircraft. Courage cannot move a battleship without oil. As evening falls, the inland sea turns dark and reflective. Lights are forbidden. The harbor becomes a silhouette of cranes and masts against a smoky sky. Somewhere out there, in black water, mines drift and submarines listen. In a private office, the Corps Admiral writes a letter, not to be mailed, but to be kept as a record in case he does not survive the coming weeks. The pen scratches softly. His words are careful, controlled, but they carry the weight of an admission he never imagined he would make as a young officer. The war cannot be won, not by tactics, not by bravery, not by any final operation. He pauses, then writes something else, more personal, almost painful. If we had more time, if we had fuel, if we had aircraft, we could at least choose how to fight. Now we can only choose how to die. He sets the pen down and stares at the paper until his eyes burn. Outside, the city is quiet, but it is not peace. It is the quiet of a ship with engines stopped, drifting in enemy waters, waiting for the next shell. And in Tokyo, behind closed doors, the admirals are no longer asking how to win. They are asking how to end. August 9th, 1945. Tokyo, Naval Ministry. The morning begins with rain, a thin drizzle that turns the streets slick and dark, as if the city is trying to wash itself clean of ash. Inside the Naval Ministry, the air is hot and damp despite the weather. Typewriters clack in bursts. Messengers move fast, heads lowered, the sense of pressure tightening like a rope. A clerk hurries down a corridor with a folder pressed to his chest. His shoes squeak on the floor. The paper inside the folder is not another routine dispatch. It is a warning wrapped in formal language, the kind of message that changes what men are allowed to hope for. In a small conference room, Navy Minister Admiral Yonai Mitsumasa sits with several senior officers. Their uniforms are worn at the edges, their faces drawn. They have slept in fragments. They have lived for months under the constant rhythm of air raid. Report, repair, repeat. A door opens. An aide steps in and bows, but the bow is too quick, the body too tense. He hands Yonai a paper, then backs away. Yonai reads. His eyes move once, twice, then stop. His jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. A vice admiral across the table watches him and asks quietly what it is. Yonai does not look up at first. "News from the north," he says. "The Soviet Union has moved." For a moment, the room feels like it loses oxygen. The men here have feared American power for years. They have studied it, measured it, fought it. The Soviet threat is different. It is not only military, it is political. It collapses the last illusion that mediation might rescue Japan from an unconditional end. One officer whispers, almost to himself, "Then there is no mediator." Yonai sets the paper down carefully. His voice is steady, but it has the hard edge of finality. There is no door left, only walls closing in. Somewhere in the building, phones begin to ring, and continue ringing, a chorus of urgency. The ministry becomes a hive, but not a confident one. It is the movement of men trying to shape chaos into decisions. In another office nearby, Admiral Toyoda Suemu receives the same confirmation. He stands with his hands behind his back, staring at a map. His staff waits, silent, watching his face for guidance. Toyoda speaks without turning. How long before they reach Manchuria in force? A staff officer answers with estimates. Numbers that feel too large to belong to Japan's remaining capacity to respond. Whole Soviet armies moving on land, backed by armor and artillery. Forces Japan cannot stop without resources it does not have. Toyoda closes his eyes for a brief moment. Not grief. Calculation. The same calculation that has repeated for months, now finally reaching a conclusion that leaves nothing unresolved. Japan is now trapped between two giants, and then, as the day grinds forward, another message arrives. Like a second blow to the chest, the city has been destroyed. Some in the room have already heard rumors of a new bomb used in Hiroshima days earlier, but the details were confused, tangled in censorship and disbelief. Now another report follows, sharper in tone, harder to dismiss. The words are clinical, but they land like horror. A single weapon, a single aircraft, a single detonation, a city turned into smoke. The officers around Yonai do not shout. They do not weep openly. They simply sit with the message in their hands, as if holding it can make it less real. One man's fingers tremble as he sets the paper down. A rear admiral murmurs. "How can we fight a weapon like that?" Yonai answers quietly. "We cannot." He is not speaking only of the bomb. He is speaking of everything. Fuel, ships, pilots, industry, food, transport. The bomb is terror. Yes, but the admission has already been made in private long before the first city vanished in a flash. The Navy understood it when Yamato sank, when the inland sea became unsafe, when the skies became American property. The bomb does not begin the defeat. It exposes it in a way no speech can hide. In the afternoon, Yonai attends another high-level meeting. The army still speaks of honor, still speaks of decisive battle, but the room is different now. The air itself feels thinner. Men glance at one another with a new kind of fear. Fear not of dying, but of dying without meaning, without even the ability to claim they forced a better outcome. A senior naval officer leans toward Yonai and whispers, almost inaudible. "Even before this, we could not continue. Now, continuation is madness." Yonai does not respond with words. He only nods once. At one point, an army general declares that the nation must accept annihilation rather than surrender. He uses phrases about national spirit, about immortality through sacrifice. His voice is strong, and for a moment it fills the room. Then Toyoda speaks, and the room quiets again. "Our capacity to resist prolonged pressure is gone," he says. "We cannot protect the seas. We cannot protect the skies. If we continue, we do not preserve the nation. We erase it." The general stares back, anger in his eyes. But he does not have a rebuttal that touches fuel or shipping or aircraft. He has only ideals, and ideals do not stop bombs. As evening falls, Tokyo's rain stops. The clouds break into ragged shapes, and the city below looks bruised and wet. In the naval ministry, Yonai remains at his desk long after others leave, reading and rereading the same reports. In a private moment, with no aides present, he speaks softly, as if confessing to the ghosts of sailors who died believing victory was possible. It was lost before this. We simply refuse to admit it out loud. He sets the papers down and stares at the wall. He's not thinking about the next operation. There is no next operation. He's thinking about the next sentence, the one that matters more than any order he has issued in years. How to tell the emperor that the Navy has nothing left. How to tell a nation raised on the promise of never yielding that yielding may be the only way to stop the killing. August 14th, 1945. Tokyo, late night. Inside a guarded government building, the city is dark under blackout, but it is not quiet. In the distance, you can still hear engines, trucks moving along rubble-strewn streets, the low murmur of guards calling to one another, the faint barking of orders. Somewhere beyond the walls, people sleep in shelters, unaware of how close their world is to ending, or how violently it might yet refuse to end. Inside a meeting room lit by a few shaded lamps, senior leaders gather again. The hours are late, but no one here is thinking about rest. Their faces are gaunt. Their uniforms hang slightly looser than they did a month ago. The war has eaten not only ships and cities, but men. On the table are papers with terms that sting the eyes. Conditions, declarations, acceptances, words that once would have been considered unutterable, now being handled like live ammunition. Admiral Yonai Mitsumasa sits forward, hands on his knees, posture controlled. The Navy minister has been fighting a different battle than the one the public imagines. Not against American carriers, but against denial. Admiral Toyoda Soemu is there too. Expression firm, jaw set. He looks like a man holding a door against a storm. Not because he believes it will stop the storm, but because he has decided the door must not be ripped from its hinges and used to kill the people inside. Across from them, Sun's army leaders sit rigid, some with eyes that burn, others with a blankness that can be more frightening than anger. The argument has been repeated so many times that it feels carved into the walls. Fight on, inflict casualties, preserve honor, refuse humiliation. But tonight, the Navy's voice is heavier than it was before, because the lies have collapsed under their own weight. The sea lanes are gone. The air is gone. The fuel is gone. The idea that Japan can prolong this war without turning the homeland into a slaughterhouse is gone. Yonai speaks first, not loudly, but clearly enough that the room cannot pretend not to hear him. The Navy has no means to continue the war in any meaningful way, he says. We can still send men to die, but we cannot change the outcome. We cannot protect the people. We cannot defend the cities. We cannot even feed the nation. An army officer opens his mouth to object, and Yonai lifts a hand, a small gesture, almost polite. I have heard the argument for decisive battle. He continues, I know the courage of our soldiers and sailors. Courage is not in question. Capability is... Toyoda adds his voice, the tone of a commander speaking to men who understand charts and distances. The enemy controls the sea and the sky. Each day we continue. Our strength decreases, and theirs does not. If we delay, we are not negotiating. We are only increasing the number of dead. A silence follows. The kind that feels like standing on a ship's deck after the engines stop, realizing the current has begun to take you where it wants. Then the most dangerous thing happens. Someone says, directly, that surrender is necessary, not as a threat, not as propaganda, as a conclusion. You can feel the tension spike. A few men stiffen as if struck. One general's face darkens, his fist tightening on the table edge. The idea of yielding has been treated as moral collapse for years. Now it sits in the open, in front of everyone, refusing to be shoved back into the shadows. Yonai does not flinch. He has been living with this reality for months. We are not choosing surrender because we fear death, he says. We are choosing it because we have already lost the means to resist. The war was lost when the fleet became immobile, when the air arm was exhausted, when the nation's lifelines were cut. The recent destruction only made it impossible to deny. There it is, the private admission spoken out loud. Not the moment of defeat, but the moment of honesty. Toyoda's eyes move across the faces in the room. Some are furious, some are broken, some look relieved in a way they will never confess. He speaks again, and this time his words feel like they are aimed not at the men in uniform, but at the future. If we continue, we risk the nation itself, not the regime, not pride, the nation, the people. The Emperor's realm, the Navy exists to protect Japan. We cannot protect it by insisting on a fight we cannot sustain. Outside, guards shift their weight. Somewhere down the hall, hurried footsteps pass, then stop. A messenger whispers to another. In these final nights, even the buildings feel unstable, as if a wrong decision could cause the walls to crack. Hours stretch. Arguments flare and then collapse. Men repeat the same points until their voices grow hoarse. The Navy holds its line, not against battle, but against delusion. And finally, the decision is set in motion, not because everyone agrees, but because the alternatives have become too monstrous to accept. Later, after the meeting, Yonai steps into a corridor and pauses. The air smells of sweat and old wood. He leans one hand against the wall, not from weakness, but from the sudden weight of what has happened. A trusted aide approaches, speaking softly. Will they accept it? Yonai answers without looking up. Some will. Some will not. But the truth does not require permission. Toyota passes behind him, and for a moment the two men exchange a glance. No words, just recognition. They have reached the point where their duty is no longer to plan victory, but to prevent annihilation. In a quiet office before dawn, Yonai sits alone and writes a final note for his own record, the kind of sentence that will never appear in wartime newspapers. The Navy understood before the end that the Empire could not endure prolonged pressure. We lacked fuel, air cover, and operational ships. We could still die, but we could no longer fight in a way that mattered. He sets the pen down and listens to the building. Somewhere, a door closes softly. Somewhere, a man coughs. Somewhere, the city breathes in darkness. Waiting, in the coming hours, the Emperor's voice will be prepared. Words chosen to carry an unbearable truth into every home. And when the nation finally hears that the war is over, many will believe it ended in that moment. But in the private rooms of the Navy, the end came earlier. It came when admirals looked at the ledgers and maps and understood that the sea had gone silent under their feet, that the sky belonged to the enemy, that the last great ship had already sunk, and that what remained was not strategy, only sacrifice. And they chose, at last, to stop spending lives as if lives were fuel.